an introduction into the anatomy of the eye and the anatomy of the cornea and sclera and the anterior chamber. So let's start with some basic information about the eye. So I understand well that among us there are house officers who have not didn't practice yet, so they may have no clue about the anatomy of the eye. So we'll start from the very basic. The eye is the primary organ of vision. As we all know, we have two eyes. They are situated in a bony cavity called the orbit. So the eye takes about 1/5 of the orbital volume. So the orbit space is about 5 times the eye volume. So you may wonder what is the remaining of the orbit is occupied with. Okay, so the eye is the embryological extension of the central nervous system. We will talk about that in the embryology in the last lecture of anatomy, saying that the eye is an extension of the brain, and that's why it shares some common anatomical and physiological characters with the brain, like that it is the optic nerve is covered with meninges, like other optic cranial nerves. Both eyes are protected by bony walls, so that because the eye is vulnerable and precious organ, so that they are both covered by the bony walls of the orbit, which will be discussed in a separate lecture. And this will have a fibrous covering and the blood supply to the essential nervous layer to the retina. So if you have a section, a lateral section, or a sagittal section in the eye. So here we removed the lateral wall of the eye, lateral wall of the orbit to and cut the lateral rectus in order to have a view of the eye. So we can see that the eye is placed in a bony cavity pyramidal in shape. It's called the orbit, and this eye is occupying 1/5 of the orbit, and the other 4/5 are occupied by the nerves, muscles, and the blood vessels. So what are the basic structure of the eye and supporting structures? We can consider the eye like having 3 layers and 3 coats and 3 compartments. So the outer coat, it is called the outer fibrous layer, which is mainly for protection. So it consists of the cornea, sclera, and the lamina cribrosa. The cornea will be occupying the anterior part, while the sclera occupying the posterior part, which is perforated in the middle by the lamina cribrosa. Middle vascular layer, or the uveal tract, which is responsible mainly for nutrition. So it will provide blood supply to the most structures of the eye. It is represented by the iris anteriorly, the ciliary body, which consists of pars plicae and pars plana, and finally the choroid. And then the inner layer, which will be the inner nervous layer, which is the retina, which is responsible for the vision. Here we can see a section of the eye showing the 3 coats. So the outer coat, it is formed by the cornea anteriorly, and the continuation of the cornea posteriorly will be the sclera, which is perforated in the middle by lamina cribrosa, which will transmit the optic nerve fibers. Then we have the middle vascular coat, which is formed by the iris and the ciliary body and the choroid. And finally, we have the inner neural layer, or inner nervous layer, which is formed by the retina. Apart from the 3 coats, we have 3 chambers or 3 compartments in the eye. The first one is the anterior chamber, which is the space between the cornea and iris diaphragm. Posterior chamber, which is bounded anteriorly by the iris, posteriorly by the lens and zonule and the ciliary body, and the vitreous chamber, which has the vitreous body, which is the space behind the lens and the retina. So you can see here, this is the anterior chamber, bounded anteriorly by the cornea and posteriorly by the iris. You can see that there is a space called posterior chamber, very small space, located between the iris anteriorly and the ciliary body, the zonule, and the lens posteriorly. And finally, we have the vitreous cavity, which contains the vitreous body, which is located between the lens anteriorly and the optic nerve and the retina posteriorly. In order to have a proper understanding of the anatomy, and you have to visualize and imagine the anatomy. So you have to be to try to work your imagination to figure out what are the different structures related to each other. So in order to have a better understanding and to better to imagine the anatomy, you have to understand the planes. So to start from lecture 1 in our medical school, we studied that there are three main planes in the body. So we have the sagittal plane, we have the coronal plane, and we have the transverse plane. Usually in the eye, we refer to the transverse plane by the axial plane. So here is the axial, and here is the coronal, and here is the sagittal. So if you wanted to reflect this or to relate these sections on the eye, so how can we see the eyes in these different sections? So if you have an axial section in the eye, you will be able to look to the eye from superior. So this is a cut into the eye, and this cut axial will be, so you will be able to see that there is the cornea, the sclera, the iris, and the lens, and the optic nerve. You will be able to see the medial and lateral rectus, and you can also see, you will be able to see the ethmoidal sinus. So this is called the axial view. For the coronal view, it will be an anteroposterior cut. So you are looking. There is a cut, coronal cut, which is this coronal cut will makes you able to see the eye anteroposterior. So you will be see a cut section into the eye, and here is the retina. You will be able to see cut sections in the recti or the extraocular muscles and the orbit fat and the bony wall of the orbit. You can see also the nasal sinuses. You can see the maxillary sinus and the nasal bone. So this is the best view in or the best section to see if there is a thickening or enlargement of the recti, or if there is any lesion in the maxillary sinus that may involve the eye. Finally, the sagittal section, in which we have a side cut of the eye. So you will be able to see this is a side cut of the roof of the orbit, and this is the side cut of the floor of the orbit. Here is the maxillary sinus, and here is the eye showing the superior rectus and the inferior rectus, and this is the optic nerve. So these are the three main cuts or orientations of the eye. So you need to have a better idea about them in order to understand the relations between different structures. So let's start with some basic anatomical data about the eye. So here is a section in the eye. So can you tell me what is this section? Exactly. So this is an axial section because we can see the eye, and this is the nasal or the ethmoidal sinuses, and here is the nose, and here is the lacrimal gland present laterally over the lateral wall of the orbit. So let's have some basic data about the anatomy of the eye or the eye globe. So first we have a point into the center of the cornea. It's called the anterior pole of the eye. The anterior pole of the eye is the center of the curvature of the cornea. And corresponding to the anterior pole of the eye, there will be a posterior pole of the eye. So the posterior pole of the eye will be the center of the curvature of the posterior curvature of the globe. It is so what is the relation of this posterior pole in relation to the optic nerve? We have we have to set a fact or to set a basis in the eye. We usually refer to medial and lateral by nasal and temporal. So nasal related to the nose, so nasal meaning that it is medial, and temporal meaning that it is related to the temporal bone or the temple, so it will be lateral. So in this section, we can see clearly that the optic nerve is nasal and the posterior pole is temporal. So this relation is one of the most important anatomical facts in the eye. And the posterior pole is the site which is located or which is situated by the fovea. So the fovea is located into the posterior pole. If we join the anterior pole with the posterior pole with a line, so this line will be called the anteroposterior diameter or the axial length. So this is like the length of the eye. So if we can refer to the length of a human being into by meters or by inches, so this will be the length of the eye. The more long the eye, or the longer the eye, the more myope, while the shorter the eye, the more hypermetrope. So this anteroposterior diameter or this axial length will determine later on the refractive state of the eye, in addition to other refractive mediums such as the lens and the cornea, as we will mention in the optics. If we bisect this anteroposterior diameter, so if there is a horizontal line that will cut this axial length in the middle, then this line will be called the equator. So this is the equator of the eye, which is the line bisecting the axial length. Other important data are the circumference of the eye, which is about 69 to 81 millimeter. We have the vertical diameter, but it's about 23 millimeters. The horizontal diameter, it is 23.5 millimeters. So we said that the globe is occupying about 1/5 of the volume of the orbit. So what is the volume of the globe? So the volume of the globe is about 7 centimeters, cubic centimeters, while the orbit is about 30 cubic centimeters. So the relation between them, it's about 4.5 to 1. And this is one of the common exam questions to ask about the relation between the orbital volume and the globe volume. So let's back to our lecture. So the aqueous volume will be about 124 millimeter square. This is some important facts. The height of the orbital opening is about 35 millimeters, while the width of the orbital opening is about 40 millimeters. Depth of the orbital opening is 40 millimeters, and finally the interorbital distance is about 25 millimeters. So this is just some important anatomical facts regarding the eye. Let's now get in depth into the eye and the different ocular structures. So we will talk about the first layer of the eye, which is the outer fibrous layer. The outer fibrous layer, it is formed by the cornea anteriorly and the sclera and lamina cribrosa posteriorly. So the cornea will be occupying the first or the anterior 1/6 of the globe of the outer fibrous coat, while the sclera will be forming the posterior 5/6 of the globe.